Well, somebody posted on Facebook this week. They were talking about Holy Week and Tourism Week in Uruguay. And so this person wrote, well, the Christians have Holy Week, and the rest of us have Easter eggs and chocolate bunnies. And so I wanted to tell you, at Christ Church, we're having Easter Week and Easter eggs all at the same time. And so I'm going to tell you about that. You saw the Easter eggs when you came in. But in fact, Friday we had a party coloring Easter eggs so that we could have a treasure hunt today for the children. In fact, there's enough eggs that anybody who doesn't go hide eggs can then go search for eggs. So you can either hide them or you can help search for them. Just don't push over the kids. And we had some creative and beautiful eggs. We also had a couple that I painted. But painting an Easter egg basically takes 3 steps. You get a normal egg that's not too cold. So it shouldn't be too cold or it'll crack in the water. The second step, you put it in the water. You slowly increase the heat until it boils. And for a hard-boiled egg, maybe 8 to 10 minutes. And then you let it cool and color it. So the cooling and coloring to me is like 1 step. So you have your normal egg, you boil it, and then you color it. So basically, this egg passes through 3 phases. We can call them the egg, the boiled egg, or the boiling egg, and the Easter egg. Okay, so that's going to help you have a little framework for our talk today. And it's not really about Easter eggs. It's about your life and my life and the world we live in. But the Easter egg gives us a picture that we can think about. Now, 2 things make an Easter egg really special. It can be fun to look at. Some of the kids were coming in. This is not in the notes, Andres. Some of the children came in and they were looking at the eggs and they said, oh, I painted this one. And another one said, can we take home the ones that we find? And someone else said, can we paint the ones that we find? And they're already painted, but that made them want to paint it more. So an Easter egg can be fun to look at, and it tells us a story. We know why we chose it, or painted it, or who painted it for us. If we're the grandmother or the mother, we say, oh, that's beautiful. And if it's really beautiful, then I didn't do it. And if I did it and you just love me, you might say, oh, that's so nice, John, thank you. But it can be fun to look at, but an Easter egg can be fun to look for. And so Easter eggs remind us of treasure hunts. And treasure hunts are the best because all of us dream of finding something or someone or some place that's really going to add joy to our life and just to have that surprise encounter. Now, treasure hunts are super fun because they start with an orientation. We'll tell the kids, this is where you go look. This is the area. And the orientation is where we understand or we think we understand what we need to do. Then there's a disorientation where we're sort of between the hope and the disappointment, or somebody pushing us out of the way. And then finally, the reorientation, where we get to tell our stories and hopefully show our treasures. So orientation, disorientation, reorientation. That's really the story of our lives. That's in an eggshell. That's our story. So, I'm going to propose that we're all like eggs. So today, thinking of the eggs. And then the water starts to boil, and we begin to change. And the question is, what will we look like when we're done? Will we be an egg that brings joy to somebody's life? And when they see us, will they consider our story? and anticipate other treasures that are out there to be found? Now, some people say that Easter eggs really, like the Christian version of Easter eggs, really became a tradition in about the 13th century in the Byzantine Empire, in like Armenia, and in the Ukraine. And so the colored egg was the idea of a colored egg was a representation of life. So you take the egg and you color it and give it life and color. And so an Easter egg was decorated then by Christians to celebrate the resurrection, the new life, and to sort of tell that story, illustrating the promise of new life always emerging out of death. And so an Easter egg for a Christian is a joyful symbol of resurrection and the endless possibilities of a new beginning. Now, in our life, we have orientation, disorientation, reorientation. We like to be in the reorientation. The bad times are behind us. People like to be on Easter Sunday when Jesus is alive. But it's so easy to forget that yesterday, Silent Saturday, everybody's heart was breaking. There was no good news on the Saturday before the resurrection. There was no good news, only tragedy, suffering, and sorrow on the Friday before the Saturday. A long time of disorientation. Well, I have a basket, and I'm going to pass this around so that you can have a look. This is going to perhaps give you some sense of disorientation during the service. These are beautiful eggs. These are from Ukraine, from a friend of mine who brought them to me from Ukraine several years ago. And we've kept them in the Wonderland because the Ukrainian Easter eggs are some of the most famous and well-known and beautifully designed in the world. And so I want you to pass. I'm just going to pass them around, and you can take and look. You can take the time that you want, look at it for as long as you want, and then just pass it on to the next person. Hopefully, try not to drop it, but if it does, then that'll be part of our disorientation. But when we're looking for treasures in life, we can't always see where the treasure is. Sometimes we're in that place of pain and suffering. And our heart may be breaking for Ukrainians or Russians or people in all the surrounding areas. I have friends in all the countries around that their churches are stopped today because they're only working with immigrants and trying to figure out how to help the situation. I have a family member who's taking truckloads of supplies into Ukraine and trying to help people as he can. And some people say, man, why would you take a truck in there? Take care of yourself. You have kids. Somebody else says, what can I do to help? And they're all of us trying to find a way to think, how do we understand this? And that's just one little place in our worlds. And then we have our own homes and our own lives and our own struggles. And so Easter eggs give hope and joy, but they also remind us of the disorientation. So when Jesus suffered and died, his struggle was real. But when he emerged from the cave where he was buried, he showed a whole new meaning to reality. Jesus showed us a whole new way to live our lives. He entered into our space. He boiled in the same pot. Remember, I'm using the image of the eggs. And he came out as a glorious treasure to be discovered, to be enjoyed by everyone. Jesus' invitation is to see reality differently, to ignore the superficial, artificial, temporary egg cartons of personality power, prestige, possessions. At the end of my message, Dr. Pete Steggles is going to read for us from Philippians chapter 2, verses 1 to 11, how Jesus laid aside his personality, prestige, possessions, and power. So the water is hot, it's uncomfortable, it's painful. It's like the disorientation of suffering, grief, and loss. When we're in the water, will we boil for 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 8 minutes? How long? Will our shell crack in the process? If our shell cracks, then what? Will we still find joy? Can you still paint a cracked egg? Yes, you can. Will we still have a story to share? For us to really celebrate Resurrection Sunday, we have to remember the dark nights for Jesus and his followers, waiting in Gethsemane. If you've read the story, the abandonment of his friends, the betrayal by a brother, the injustice of the judges, the beatings of the bullies, the scorn of the crowds, the shame of his nakedness and abuse, the cruelty of the crucifixion, the cold silence of the grave. There was no time to prepare a body. There was no time for the loved ones to consider what was happening. There's the brokenness of Mary, Jesus' mother, standing before the cross. There's Peter, weeping bitterly in the night. There's Judas, swinging from the tree where he hanged himself in shame. There's the unnamed disciple fleeing through the garden, running so fast he left his clothes behind him. There's James and John, committed to following Jesus, but now they've gone back to their fishing boats. They once believed Jesus to be the Christ, the promised Messiah. But now they live in a world of crushing disappointment, unspeakable sadness, unnamed fears. And you know, when I look out at the world, I look out the window and it is beautiful. And I look at your faces and you are beautiful. And I think of my grandbaby that was just born and my kids last night, and I cried a tear of joy. But I also know someone abused by a person they trusted. Someone abandoned, cheated, betrayed. Someone left alone by a loved one who died. Someone who lost a job. They can't find a replacement. Someone who lost their health, and so they can't work. Someone with cancer who's confused about the next step to take. Someone who lost their faith. Someone who's looking for faith but can't seem to quite get there. Someone who's feeling trapped, ashamed, they're a prisoner of their addiction. Someone who feels innocent. I didn't do anything, but I'm unloved. And the list goes on. You know, and I think of that and I say, you know, I'm just one more in this sad sea of humanity. And then I say, thank God for Easter Sunday and for Easter eggs. New beginnings are possible. Hope is real. But sometimes we're in the slow boil, waiting for the transformation in the confusing, disoriented in between. So Easter Sunday gives us hope. But think about it. No egg gets painted without being boiled first. Even Jesus went through Gethsemane. And living in our world is like being in a pot of boiling eggs. So what are we supposed to do or think or feel? Now, Jesus' example in Gethsemane, and that, if you remember, he was like abandoned. He laid on the ground praying, crying out to God. Not one time, not 2 times, 3 times. He said, Lord, take this thing away from me. Is there another way? And you know what? He didn't get the miracle he was praying for. Jesus. The Bible says he was acquainted with suffering. He was present, though, with his own emotions. And in all of those circumstances, he spoke life to the people around him. Peter didn't care about praying. I mean, he fell asleep. I'd be about like Peter, probably fall asleep. But Peter, when he saw there was something to do, he got out his sword and cut off the guy's ear and, just swinging his sword. And Jesus was present right there. And he said, no, that's not the way. Put the ear back. And he did. And he could have just said, tough luck, guy. You lost an ear. Well, you shouldn't have come for me in the dark. But he put his ear back. He spoke life to John, to his mother Mary, to the thief who was crucified. He was present enough to forgive those who mocked him. He surrendered his spirit into the hands of God. If you and I want to be present to other people around us who are suffering, we have to be present with our own grief and loss first. We have to know ourselves. We must become real. Less personality, more reality. We have to notice and name our emotions, our grief, our sorrow, our pain. And when we're present with ourselves and at peace with our past, then we can share and enter in to those around us. That's the treasure. So many people, myself included, we run from reality. We hide from humility. Reality seems harsh, and humility seems weak and passive. Like, who wants to be humble? Yet Jesus reminds us that our life is like a seed. A seed falls into the ground and dies with the hope of bearing fruit. And so Easter is first of all a story of suffering and Jesus crying out to God in dark silence. But eventually there comes the dawn of the promised new day. Promised, but nobody really believed it could happen. No one was looking for it. Nobody was expecting it. Yet the joyful return of Jesus to bring new life out of death now seems strangely real. Did you ever go into your closet? Not in the notes, Andres. Did you ever go into your closet and find a coat you hadn't worn, and you reached in the pocket and you found the missing headphones or some money or something you looked for, and you're like, where was this all the time? And the joy of a treasure you didn't even expect. Well, Easter is not only about hope. Easter is about Psalm 23, learning to walk through the valley of the shadow of death and not fear evil, because the great shepherd walks with us. The treasure is Jesus' message. Life goes on beyond what man can do to us. God's grace and mercy are greater than all of our brokenness. Now, we say, show me that. Well, that's where faith comes in, because there's no guarantees. There's no way to show what it looks like to trust when you're falling off the cliff. Psalm 56:3 says, "When I am afraid, I will put my trust in you. In God I trust, and I'm not afraid. What can mere mortals do to me?" Well, we all have fear. So there's an emotion that's fear, but there's a terror that's like, I am lost in this life with no direction, and that's replaced by the trusting in the love of God. So what do? We recognize the boiling water in our life that has produced these painted eggs. And so just mention a couple of things. They'll be on the screen. You can pay attention to the pain. Pete Scazzaro from Emotionally Healthy Spirituality says, pay attention to the pain. Job's story is the story of us all. Except Job in the Old Testament, if you know the story, he lost everything in like a couple of days. And we lose it over our whole life. But life is a series of losses. So as the losses come in, instead of thinking this is an alien invasion that is upsetting my good life, say this is something that happens in the world that we live. How can I find the treasure in this for me? So we pay attention to the pain. We don't ignore it. We don't deny it. We wait in the confusing, that time of disorientation. God is never in a rush. We are. He's not. And so we wait. And there's so many stories in Scripture of God teaching his people to wait. Psalm 27:14. Wait for the Lord. Be strong. Take heart. Wait. I don't like to wait. I like to move on, do it now, figure it out. But there's waiting. Let the old give birth to the new. For something new to come, something else has to end. Add something new to your life, or what are you going to give up? You want to learn a new habit, you have to get rid of probably an old habit. And so, there's so many things. I'll go on. There are some treasures that we can find. Pay attention, wait in the confusion in between, and the third one was let the old give birth to the new. So we want the new, but we don't want to wait. So that's why I made the emphasis on the waiting. And a couple of treasures that we might find along the way. We might discover a greater understanding of God, his mercy, his love. You come through a hard time, and many of you have, perhaps all of you have, when you can look back and see what God has done. Then you can say like Jeremiah, when his city was destroyed and his life was ruined. Jeremiah is the prophet that for 40 years, nobody believed him, nobody listened to him, everything went wrong. And he still bought a piece of land outside the city because he said, one day this will be for my grandson. And it was. The history tells us. But it wasn't for him, and he said what I already quoted, Lamentations 3:21. One thing comes to my memory that fills my heart with hope. The great love of the Lord never runs out. He always has compassion. Every day I remember his faithfulness. So there's another thing that sorrow and grief and loss can do. It makes us more true to ourselves. Somebody who's been through sorrow and grief doesn't wear as many masks. You don't worry about impressing others. We're more willing to be vulnerable and say, I'm more willing to be who I am. There's another thing that God can give us, a treasure that we can find in grief, is we realize we cannot control things, and then we can say, we don't have to control things. It is so liberating when you can stop having to control. Jesus, you want to think of Mary? Mary was going to lose her reputation, her security, her dreams, everything. And she surrendered it all in faith to say, I will have this baby. And so sometimes we have to get rid of who we think we are and we're going to be the person God wants us to be. A fourth thing, God makes us softer, more compassionate. You want to be a mature person, able to be a father or a mother of the faith, a grandparent spiritually to others, then embrace your suffering. See what you're learning through that. A fifth thing, we become alive to our world. Somebody who's suffered is grateful for the small things. We're still not chasing. We say, wow, it's a beautiful day. We become like the child who sees the insect. Today we were on the plaza watching the sun rise. One of the little children was on her knees watching an ant. I'm like, you can see an ant any day, anywhere. Look at the sun. I didn't say that. But that was like the adult who forgot how to be a child and say, wow, this is right in front of me. What a precious moment. And once we've been broken, we can connect. And we live in a world where there's fighting and racism and conflict about every conceivable thing. We're in conflict. And if we get in touch with your own suffering, your own grief, then you can enter into somebody else's. Thank you, Elizabeth. So, eggs are fragile. These eggs survive. They break. They crack easily. And so do we. But if we enter in, we can enter another person's loss. So a final prayer. And Pete Where is Pete? Pete, I'm going to ask you to come and read. This is a prayer. It's a quote. I have learned things, says Barbara Brown Taylor. I have learned things in the dark that I could never have learned in the light. The dark silence of Jesus in Gethsemane. I have learned things in the dark I could never have learned in the light, things that saved my life over and over again. So there's really only one logical conclusion. I need darkness as much as I need light.